It's too bad we can't see where everyone is from.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hello, Emily.
Hi,
I'm from Savannah.
Are you from Savannah? Oh, neat.
Savannah.
I'm from New Jersey.
Blue, Georgia.
Wow.
Georgia being blue now.
Georgia's
From near Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm also near DC.
You could
So
say
howdy, neighbor.
No one
Hey.
knows.
Where?
I'm in Elkridge, so I'm in Maryland.
Oh, wow.
I'm in Philadelphia, the home of Emily Grossholz. Origin, point of origin.
Wow.
I also am from Philadelphia, from the People's Republic of Philadelphia.
Oh, shoot.
Cheers.
Eleanor, you're in Philadelphia, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm in Northern Virginia, which is officially cut off from Washington, D.C. through Thursday.
Lucky you.
Oh,
They
wow.
close the bridges. Yeah, it's going to be something.
Wow.
I'm coming to you from our secret clubhouse, which is our camper outside the beautiful metropolis of Medora, Indiana, where I have been for solid months.
Wow.
For how long?
A long time, several years since last year.
For 4 years.
I'm in Plymouth, Massachusetts, a mile and a half from Plymouth Rock.
Ooh,
Wow.
Nice.
I have to get my map out.
Great place to live.
Yeah, I love Plymouth.
Is it cold and snowy there now?
No, it's sunny. Well, no, it's dark now, but
Snowy though.
it
Snowy?
rained this morning and we and temperatures in the 40s this afternoon. It's spring.
Wow.
Yeah, we
Well,
have.
it's cold in Georgia. It's 50 degrees.
Oh, come on.
We
It
have
is
cherries blooming.
Freezing.
I'm in Connecticut,
Oh,
Ridgefield,
all right.
Connecticut, where it's still raining, I think.
But doesn't anybody have snow?
No.
I'm in Pleasant Hill, California, where it's 76 degrees.
Oh, well.
It's 81 and
Where in
Washington.
California? Where in California?
Pleasant Hill is about 17 miles east of San Francisco.
I lived there a long time.
I was
I grew up in San
my
Francisco.
first 6 years in New Jersey, though, so I really appreciate the
Oh, all
temperature.
right.
And
Well, I was born in Montana, so I know all about cold, really.
That's
I'm
a
from
good place. to
Philadelphia,
visit.
and cherry trees are blooming here.
Here too, yeah.
Oh, how nice.
It's beautiful but sad.
That?
Well, it's January.
Yeah, frost is gonna come and the buds are gonna
Yep.
go, yeah.
Oh, I see. They won't come back ever? No?
They might, sometimes they do.
Ever, yeah, they will come back.
But we have cherry trees in Montana too, on Flathead Lake. All around the lake. I'm from the mountains, which is right by Flathead Lake. And then they have the cherry trees in the spring. And I suppose the frost gets them sometimes.
Alex, when should we begin?
You can start anytime, David. You're in charge, remember?
Okay. Okay, let us begin then. Welcome to another Able Muse reading. I'm David Alpaugh, and I'll be your host today. We have two poets and a fiction writer in the dugout. All three have books from Word Galaxy Press, which is an imprint of Able Muse. As a poet with my own book from Word Galaxy Press, entitled Spooky Action at a Distance, it's a collection of what I call double title poems because I don't want to be chintzy. So I have a title reading into the poem and also have a title reading out. And having my book published officially last May, just as the pandemic was getting in full swing, I certainly appreciate Zoom, and I have done a few feature readings myself. And I'm delighted to be helping three Word Galaxy authors defy actuality and share their work in cyberspace. A few matters of Zoom business. I'm going to mute everybody. All been muted. So barking dogs, whistling tea kettles, and other ambient sounds won't disrupt our readers. If you are a reader participating in, or participating in the Q&A, important to unmute yourself before you start speaking. Applause is going to be silent during the readings, but I will unmute everyone at the end so we can be as raucous as we want in showing our appreciation. I have put my view setting on speaker and suggest you may want to also, all of you do that so that the speaker pops up into full screen when the speaker is reading. I'll be introducing our first reader shortly, but I'd like you to meet and hear, you probably have met him already, but for those of you who haven't, the force behind this and many other literary events, Alexander Pepple. Alex founded and edits Able Muse Press, and the press's imprint, Word Galaxy Press. He also founded and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. His poetry and prose have been or will be published in Barrow Street, River Styx, Measure, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Think Journal, Euphony, and elsewhere. And he edited the Able Muse anthology back in 2010, which is one of the books which launched Able Muse Press. And I think Alex has produced 71 books so far for Able Muse. He is the initiator and coordinator of this literary reading series, so I want to begin with a greeting from the able man behind all things Able Muse, Alexander Pepple.
Thank you very much for that introduction, David. And as we had our first reading not long ago from Bill Baer and Aaron Pukijan and Susan DeSola, and I told you then that we'll have more of this reading, and I'm glad to see that we've been able to come back here and listen to three very capable authors read for you. So without much delay, I'll just let them go in and do their thing. So thank you very much all for showing up, and I hope you have a great time this evening. Okay, take it away, David.
Thanks, Alex. Our first reader is poet John Beaton, and he was raised in the Scottish Highlands, enjoying child summers on the Isle of Skye. I envy that. A retired actuary, he currently lives in Qualicum Beach on Vancouver Island, Canada. John Beaton's poetry is metrical, and he has been widely published in media as diverse as Able Muse and Gray's Sporting Journal. He wrote a monthly poetry page for several years for the Canadian magazine Eyes on BC and served for 4 years as moderator of Able Muse's online workshop, Erratosphere. He recites his poems from memory as a spoken word performer and as a member of the band Celtic Chaos. His awards include the 2015 String Poet Prize and the 2012 Able Muse Wright Prize for Poetry. His first collection of poetry, Leaving Combustion of Egg, I hope I'm saying that correctly, is forthcoming in April officially from Word Galaxy Press on the big sites, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But if you order now direct from the press, it'll ship immediately. Please join me in welcoming John Beaton.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Alex, for making all this possible. David, thank you for that introduction and for hosting. Emily and AG, it's a pleasure to be doing this jointly with you. And all of those at you at home, it's thank you for attending. It's been a bleak winter, and in the States, I know there have been problems with false information and COVID, and we're not immune from that here in Canada. Recently, there was an outbreak of COVID in one of our prisons, and some of the prisoners escaped to avoid infection, went to the harbor, stole some boats, and took to the sea, but they had no supplies. So now they're attacking and looting other boats. So that's the COVID problem. The false information problem Well, judge for yourself, because this is a conspiracy theory. Is the penny dropping? It's hard to see on Zoom. Anyway, now we got that out of the way to the book. I'll just show it again. Thanks, Alex, for publishing. I'm going to present 3 poems from it tonight. 2 will reflect our current situation, a bleak winter, but with hope for a brighter future. And the 3rd will talk about the power of poetry. So for the first one, come with me to a river that flows near our house, the Little Qualicum. It's a winter day, bleak. The deciduous trees have lost their leaves, but they're covered in thick moss and lichen called witch's hair. It's December, it's snowy, and the Pacific salmon have run up the river earlier in fall, and they've all spawned and died. Then bears and otters, gulls and eagles have eaten all the flesh from their carcasses, but the bones are still here. I'm standing in the river valley surrounded by wall-to-wall skeletons. This poem addresses those skeletons to the dead of winter. Now is the time of the moss, and it fleeces the alders en masse as they stand in the mists of the bottomland. Though witches' hair drapes from their frames, they're but haggard old widows and weeds who abide by the graves of your race. For these trees seem so sere that their sap will not rise, that their laceworks of leaves will not lattice the skies, though their grayness and gauntness have donned the disguise of these snow-sprinkled green sleeves of fleece. Now is the time of the snow, though at noon there's a moment of thaw, when the river runs clear by the skulls and the gill plates at rest in the shallows or enveloped in snow and the gravel like masks, and your head has a jaw that grew hooked as you ran with your instincts of flame and your scales turning scarlet. The maples became inflamed with your fire, which the winter would tame as it laid down your dead like the law. Now is the time of the dead, between fall when the flesh pots were red and the spring when the fingerling fry will die in the dance of the riffle or flee to the reds in the bed from mergansers and herons and gulls to endure as their myriads falter to fewer and fewer till they run for the sea, then return when mature to this boneyard from which they were bred. Now is the time of the bones, of your petrified gape. It bemoans how the beaks picked your skeleton clean as they pecked out your stomach and heart through a grillwork of ventricle racks on a spine that is chevroned with spines, leaving teeth that ripped herring balls, blood scale and skin, leaving orbits to your eyeballs were gimbaled within, and an arrowhead neb that was driven by fin to be bonded by ice to these stones. Now is the time of the bonds, of the destinies twined like the fronds in the lichen. Your whole generation who hailed from this valley returned, and in thousands engaged in an orgy. Its climax, a slough of despond's shudder as victims were swallowed, the strife as the spawning stress killed with its grollicking knife. And you wallowed in currents that vied for your life, with which time the great river absconds. Well, the bright spot after all that is that grimness is that in spring the eggs will hatch out and there'll be a new generation of salmon. For the second poem, Come With Me to Orkney. It's a set of remote islands off the northern coast of Scotland. In summer, it's a beautiful place. Long days, rolling hills, bright, wide skies, lush farms, and lots of ancient ruins, including standing stones. Every year, for quite a number of years, Joyce and I, my wife, she's down here somewhere, I've gone to Orkney to the Summer Folk Festival, and when I've been there, I've always been mystified by the number of fine musicians, mainly string instrumentalists, that hail from such a small community. Then I figured it out one day. I thought about winter there. It's so far north, the days would be very short. There would be some snow. It's exposed to the North Sea, so the winds would be fierce. And what would people do all winter there? Well, obviously, there was my answer. They practiced their music and it flourished at the Summer Folk Festival. So here's my poem. Midwinter Music. The hawthorn branches' lightning lines are paralleled by seams of white. A snowfall mantles them, each jagged angle traced, each pronged and ragged fork embalmed, perhaps embraced. Around the fields, old stunted pines grow flocculent with flakes, despite the fires within. The farms are wooled with snow, their sills and gutters ruled and cushioned with small corniced hills. On open moors, the dry stone dikes of scalloped crests, the dry stone dikes of scalloped crests on open moors, the windward sides of standing stones blockade the blow, black and upright, till driving snow feathers them into background white. The moaning wind stravagues and quests, but one communal call abides, as flurries hover, glide and fall among the drifts. Inside a hall, a cellist's hand position shifts. The next poem is, as I said, about the power of poetry. In 9 days, on January 25th, it'll be Robert Burns Day, and a time when people celebrate Scotland's most famous poet, with Burns suppers in almost every country around the world every year. What makes him this famous? Well, these suppers are tributes to his life and works, but also to why they remain relevant to this day. They're quite elaborate affairs, and they involve the stabbing of a haggis, which I've done quite a few times. You can actually find a video of me stabbing a haggis by looking for John Beaton haggis. It's the best organic food, by the way. It's all organs. Anyway, why is his work so well remembered? Well, one reason is that he was born not long after Scotland finally lost its fight for independence at the Battle of Culloden in 1746, and he was a strong proponent of Scottish freedom and independence. So his work goes down well with today's highly active Scottish Nationalist Party movement. But he's known for other things. He was, as many of the males of his generation were, a chauvinist, but he was kind of a romantic one, perhaps too romantic. He supposedly fathered 13 children by 5 women. But in the process, he left us some wonderful love songs, like My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose. He was a great one for companionship and conviviality, often fueled by drink. He started a debating club, but held the meetings in his favorite pub, the Tarbolton Inn. One of his most famous poems is about a fellow called Tam O'Shanter, a farmer who got drunk on Halloween night and narrowly escaped capture by the devil. And that poem contains phrases like quite a few of his other works that exist to this day. No man can tether time or tide. And one of his most famous song, Auld Lang Syne, that was sung around the world as the millennium changed, is about companionship and common memory. But he's most remembered for his call for social justice and equality. He wrote poems like The Cotter Saturday Night, where he extolled the worth of the common man. And he also wrote a scathing satire against the church in Holy Willie's Prayer. but one of his poems, often sung as a song, has been called by many his anthem for humanity. A Man's a Man. It was sung at the inauguration of the new Scottish Parliament in 1999. I'll just give you a little taste of the last verse. For that, and that, it's coming yet for that man to man, the world o'er, shall brothers be for all that. Anyway, he's well remembered, and a centerpiece of Burns' suppers is the Immortal Memory, which is a speech. I've been at a lot of quite boring ones, and I thought it should be written as a poem in Burns' hallmark format, the Happy Stanza. So I wrote one, I did it in plain English, so it'll be easier to understand for North American audiences than his Lowland Scots. So here's my Immortal Memory for Robert Burns. The 25th of January, 1759 AD, brings you into this world, a wee and helpless bairn. As Scotland's hope stands hopelessly, Culloden's cairn. You live on farms and grow up poor in penuries that fast inure men to the plough and stony moor to scrape a living from land few farmers can endure, harsh, unforgiving. And yet you find small ways to heed the beauty of that land, to read its books, its lines, its breed of common people buckled beneath the crushing creed of laird and steeple. Your 19th birthday, now you link the joy of words, the work of drink, and make Tarbolton inmates think in what you dub to be a working man's clink clink debating club. And you rebel, your sword, the pen, wielded with fiery acumen, and beard the lions in their den, the church and gentry, in bold defense of working men, their saint and sentry. You hold the cotter's head up high, compare drunk Tam to kings, and try false holy Willie for his lie. You claim the clan of humans is ennobled by the honest man. Young women worship what you say and lie with you in summer hay, then bear your brood the following May when they can't stop. The cultivation then in play for next year's crop. So many loves to kiss and thrall and catch as in your arms they fall. You portion solace to them all with vows and songs that part of you on some fair knoll to each belongs. But in the end, it's death you fight. Lost infants, loves, your body's blight, and as you do, you write and write throughout your strife and universalize the plight of burning life. No man can tether time or tide, so off on Tam's grey mare you ride across hell's barren countryside, where you compose a song of love and plant with pride one red, red rose. Rab, look at what you've left behind, a nation's heritage defined by peopled landscapes of the mind. We laud your birth, as yet your old Scots verses bind the world's worth. And in closing, I'll just give you one small piece of advice about COVID. Beware of the new species of insect that has evolved. They chew holes in your COVID face protections. They're called mosquitoes. And with that, back to you, David.
Thank you, John Beaton, for stirring musical reading. Okay, our next poet is Emily Grossholz. She is a poet, translator, and literary critic. She was born in the suburbs of Philadelphia. She attended the University of Chicago and Yale University and is currently Edwin Earl Sparks Professor of Philosophy, African American Studies, and English at Pennsylvania State University, where she has taught since 1979. She is the author of 8 books of poetry, including The Stars of Earth, New and Selected Poems from Word Galaxy Press in 2017. Her interest in mathematics, cosmology, and the intersection between poetry and science is realized in books that include Great Circles, The Transits of Mathematics and Poetry. She is an advisory editor for the Hudson Review, and her newest book, Reflections on Poetry and the World, Walking Along the Hudson, is her homage to that journal. She lives with her husband in State College, Pennsylvania, and spends summers teaching at the Westchester Poetry Conference and at Writing the Rockies. Please join me in welcoming Emily Grossholz.
Thank you. Well, I wish I had my poems memorized, but I'm going to have to read them from this lovely book with a painting by Farhad Ostavani, who I met through Yves Bonnefoy, and the book that was just mentioned also has a lovely cover by Farhad Ostavani. So I'm going to start to read the title poem, The Stars of Earth. And I mean, I just thought that would be a good idea to start with. And it's actually about lightning bugs. You would think from the lovely cover that it was about something else, but it's really about lightning bugs. Come away, come outside now, we whispered to the children who that summer's night were plastered to the noisy screen of their electric muses. Cell phones, television, texting, word. They tumbled from their couches anyway, half-roused, and followed blindly across the street and up the hills beside the churches, far from the cornfields, looking down the valley's darkness, and further away, the darkness of uneven glacial hills, moraine fashioned 50,000 years ago, years when there was no summer. Darkness everywhere, and 4 awed children shivering in the warmth. And as we turned back home, we came to a tree on fire with fireflies, a veteran oak crusted from crown to root with tiny disturbances that pulsed and blazed as if they sang of love, but sang in silence. Now, the next 2 poems are also about my kids, and they have to do with music, which brings me back to what John was saying, because in the recent past, a number of my poems have been set to music, and it's one of the most wonderful things that has happened to me. an American who's here, Bruce Trinkley, a Japanese woman, Coco Tanakara, and a Italian composer, Mirko Di Stefani, and then also an English composer who is in fact from Japan also, Hanako Omori, who works with James Bay. And I just love it. And I was thinking about it. I've been thinking about it for a number of years. And one of the things that's so wonderful when your poems are turned into songs is that you can't really forget them. And this makes me think of Donovan's songs that he turns some of Yeats's poems into songs. And I talk about that in my book about poetry and math, because I'm sort of talking too much and not reading the poems, but poems are organized by periodicity. And then when you put the periodicity of song on top of the periodicity of the poems, then you have them. So this is called First Piano Lesson. I had 2 older kids and then 2 kids who were kind of the same age. And the younger kids would listen to their brothers play the piano, and then they'd go up to the piano and try to bang on it, and it would never work. And then they had their first piano lesson. And so this is about their first piano lesson and the amazement that they felt in their first piano lesson, or their first piano lessons, which were Suzuki piano lessons, by the way. First piano lesson. For years, they have been pressing the white keys, sometimes the black, occasionally haphazardly, great fingerfuls together. But where exactly was the music, they wondered? Gone. Today, they built a bridge from C to G, as if across Giverny's garden pond. Perhaps it is a rainbow. G to C, oral, slant visible, inevitable, clear. They stand amazed around the grand piano, capable at last of lifting up from sound's long restlessness, the dripping, glittering net of intervals, and in its knotted strings, that golden fish, a song. And I'm happy to say that was first published in the Suzuki Journal. This one is called The Choir, and it's actually dedicated in our Able Muse book, in our Word Galaxy book, to my Italian translator and to Mirko Di Stefani, who was turning my songs into poems. I mean, my poems into songs. Now, this is about listening to my daughter a number of years ago singing in the house and in her room. And then towards the end, I think, oh, she won't be there forever. And actually, as I was rereading it yesterday, trying to get ready for this, I started crying because my kids were back for Christmas, and then, of course, you know, they go away after Christmas. Okay, so this is called The Choir. My girl sings in her room alone, one of the 1,000 songs she knows by heart, uploaded sideways on her iPod, molecule by molecule, soundlessly strung, effortlessly flung across innumerable times and infinitesimal blue spaces. So sweet. Her true soprano warbles, wobbles, writes itself, and then continues on, flocks spiraling. How quiet this old house will prove in later years. When love summons my girl, and all the thrushes, starlings, finches, doves, and waxwings will have flown. And that's what has happened. She's up with a really, really nice boyfriend in Boston, working for TJ Maxx as a marketer. She's really good at that. So I guess she's got some of the mathy stuff. And let me just mention that one of my books called Childhood, which is about kids and growing up, has been translated now into Japanese, French, German, Bulgarian, and Italian, and it's now being translated into Bengali. And I also love that kind of translation. So what's more wonderful, having your poems turned into songs or turned into other languages? Or both. Okay, so how much, let's see, so I'm going to read one more poem, which is related to another book that I wrote, which is about math and cosmology. And I was able to write that because I got a lot of help from the mathematicians here at Penn State and the cosmologists here at Penn State over a whole number of years. And I learned really, really a lot from them. I went to some of the courses, and and then at Writing the Rockies, one day we went to the Gunnison Valley Observatory. And that was a wonderful experience that I understood in a way I wouldn't have before. And this poem is about that. So. It's also about trying to write a poem and having trouble writing the poem, and then finally the poem comes. The empty page reproaches me like the blue sky devoid of clouds. The sun's diffuse, reflected light. Hiding 10,000 visible stars, and further off 100 billion galaxies our eyes will never see, red shifting as they leave us, waving goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye. I can't recall their names sometimes. Sometimes their names come back to me. Virgo, Aldebaran. Sometimes a lucky telescope extends out from a cleft observatory dome perched on the high plains ringed about by berms and mountains. Then the stars appear. Look, There are the rings of Saturn, horns. And there are craters on the moon and seas that are not seas. And there, oh, look, a double star that peers like fox eyes from the den of space. And there's a spiral galaxy, all arms. And here's the poem, burning on the page. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say, Emily, that I don't think anyone, any composer reading your poetry or hearing you read it, I don't think we should be surprised if they want to say, yes, I really need to set that to music. There's a real deep music in your poems, and I think we all appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Okay, our last author is A.G. Harmon, and he grew up on a horse and cattle farms in Mississippi and Tennessee, and he currently teaches at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. His fiction, essays, and reviews have appeared in Tri-Quarterly, the Antioch Review, Shenandoah, the Bellingham Review, St. Catherine Review, Image, and Commonweal, among others. His novel, A House All Stilled, won the Peter Taylor Prize from the University of Tennessee Press in 2002, and was the runner-up for the 2007 William Faulkner Prize for the novel in 2003. His academic work, Eternal Bonds, True Contracts, Law and Nature in Shakespeare's Problem Plays, was published by State University of New York Press in 2004. He was a 2003 Walter Dakin Fellow at the C1E Writers Conference. His collection of short stories, Some Bore Gifts, was published by Word Galaxy Press in 2017. Please join me in welcoming A.G. Harmon.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be among poets tonight. I'm only a prose writer, but nevertheless, I'll try to do my best for that group. And I want to thank Alex, of course, for publishing the collection, Some More Gifts, a couple of years ago. I'll read a version of the title story from my collection, which is a fictionalized account of an event that happened to my late father, a retired surgeon many years ago, when a team of Mexican tree cutters came to our farm to trim branches away from the power lines. As it turned out, the men had just returned from the Gulf Coast, where they'd been helping clear away the ravages of Hurricane Katrina. I just have you know that the tragedy that the Mexican speaks of and the memories that the doctor has are all true. I made up all the rest. Juan Julio could describe the misfortune with a soft clarity, so that the impression he left upon the listener was that of a tune hummed from a porch step during the long, liquid hours of the first floating dark. That it was a brutal and tragic tale did not diminish the gentleness of its comprehension. Such was Juan Julio's skill. Neither did the fact that it was a steaming 100-degree day, heavy as the rain clouds that ballooned about the sky above the pasture. As his men labored at a distance, sawing and trimming out tree foliage that threatened the power lines, he told the story again, and the old man at his side, a doctor to whose farm the crew had been sent, stood privy to the pressure of Juan Julio's romance. They sent us after the hurricane, he said, down to a place too far from the city for the cameras to come, too far from the sea for people to know of. Old people lived there, the old poor ones, the kind who cannot be driven from their homes, even by the promise of more to eat and less to do and a cooler place to do it in. The drone of the saws lamenting against the green wood drew closer, made it harder for Dr. Priest to hear. So the old man stepped within a few feet of the Mexican and positioned himself so that his best ear was nearest the tail. Dr. Priest had lived his whole life in this town, the last half of it on this farm, and he had never met a Mexican. But these 5 men were all from down there, as was every other man who came to the place now, to haul horses, to fix water mains, to read the meter. They worked from a white service truck with a cherry picker to lift one man up to the level of the interlaced elms, hackberries, and sumacs that crowded the phone lines. And down on the road that faced the doctor's land, a 5th drove a tractor with a boom cutter. A platform of blades whirled at the end of an arm reaching from the sheen to the bordering trees. So they sent us down after the hurricane, Juan Julio repeated, streaming down the branch-filled roads in our trucks, caught in the trail of the storm's pull, to this land that was no more caged than world, trapped within its own being, as though the whole place had sat upon a cloth, and that cloth upon a table, and then, at some moment, the 4 corners had been taken up, to let all that lay upon the surface plunge in upon itself, this way and that, over and under and against, until it made no sense anymore. He wiped his brow with the meat of his forearm so that the flesh glistened in the early afternoon light. He was as tall as Dr. Priest had been before age had stooped him, but besides his status and his formal air, there was a marked difference between the foreman and the others. They were small, mustachioed, they veiled their black eyes beneath dusty, close-fitting caps, but he was clean-shaven, hatless, his hair cut short in a military style. It would have been all right, said Juan Julio, had we been the same kind of. In a strange place, there must be something you can count on. The men beside you must know the things you do. He stopped, wiped his brow again. Dr. Priest stepped closer, but we were not the same men. Because those they sent were of all types, all skills, and many were not fit for the task. They were not men for a place with no line between outside or in, when water lapped at windows and trees lay down like the slain. Even the men from Juan Julio's crew were unsure of their way, though clearing the land was their native task. It was as though they were chipping away at an ice wall to uncover the bones of a primitive beast, or sweeping the floor of a pit to reveal the stones of an ancient culture, trying to retrieve a thing or a place that the earth had swallowed up with its slow brown mouth. We were dizzy with fatigue and our thirst could not be slaked, he said, though we drank constantly. The work we did was poor, careless, including that of the skilled. The best of us gave place to the least, and even a good job begun would likely end in frustration, broken tools, lack of oil, lost directions, fistfights. More than once, Juan Julio had studied a man then gauged the size and strength of his own. Dr. Priest closed his eyes, nodded. He had been in war. He had known the same thing that the Mexicans spoke of, and done worse than just ponder it. It was a hazy day, said Juan Julio, his voice rising to the pitch of the saws. None of us mentioned the pale fog that hung in the air, but we noticed and worried why it should be. Was it fire eating its way towards us silently? They could not spell spoke. So was it rain, the mist of some early child of a storm, thrust from the giant's hollow, now growing into a menace of its own? But the clouds were high that day, he said, and the wind was docile, so how could it be rain? Still there it hung, as though they had stepped within a curse for which they were ignorant of both the deserving and the unfolding. And all day they rubbed their eyes, but none could speak of what he feared. I had been working on the tractor, he said, guiding the boom so that it lay against a snarl of trees and undergrowth. The arm would catch at times, buck and bounce when placed against a mass too thick for it to eat. 2 men trailed behind me, pulling away the cuttings and pilings and putting them into heaps. I could not see them back there, but I knew where they were. The work was slow, the man explained, 20 feet an hour. At some point, he said, I stopped, climbed down. I do not remember whether I meant for someone to relieve me. I do not recall asking for such a thing, but I remember stepping aside as someone brushed past, climbed into the tractor cab, started the motor, then the cutter. He continued to point towards the road. Dr. Priest watched on as the tractor crawled, as the cutter gnawed. Why did I do that? He asked the old man. Step away. I remember that I stopped, surprised to see my feet, and wondered how I had come to be there. I put my hand to my head, and he did so again, brushing his brow as if the doctor had asked him to repeat the gesture so as to unfold the symptoms of some malady. And they tell me that I had worked for 8 hours straight. They tell me that I had taken no water. Those things I cannot remember, though I can still recollect the size of my swollen tongue. What is true is impossible to say. But though I did not see it, as I stood there, the new man in the cab lurched the machine forward so that it bucked on its axle, one wheel catching and spinning in the mud, and the Mexican turned sideways, threw out his hip to mimic the thing's massive pitch. The boom snapped, he said, the pins that held it fast, so that it swung free, turned back on the two men behind. One leapt clear, not the other. The thing destroyed the man in a scale of ways, as though it could not decide on the right manner in which to kill him. There were two great slashes, he said, one from the man's ear to his chest, the other from his collar to his hip, so that he lay on the ground in a curve like a spring coiled in an angle upon the grass. It was a neat death, the cut so great that the blood came in gouts. When he died with his arm curled beneath him, his hand held in his hand, and that hand upon the earth, as if he were ashamed of the way he had ended, as if his wounds were his sins, and he must hide his eyes from judgment. When Juan Julio was finished, he stepped back, man, the tail itself lighted laid upon the ground, marked with stones, a small cairn of sorrow. He opened the door, the sun lumbered through the sky, and Dr. Priest made his way back through the shadowless pasture to the house, the crew having stopped for the day. He stood in the kitchen to let the frigid air dry his sweat into a carapace, but he did not feel like ending the day just yet. With a glass of tea, he went back outside and sat on the gallery swing. The sun was reaching the point in the afternoon when it fell level with the roof line and hence shot a cannon of light beneath the gallery eaves. For the time being, it only blazed across his feet, but soon the glare would drive him from his place. He lifted his tea glass and ran it along his forehead, then down the sides of his cheek. They had taken a liking to each other from the first, he and the Mexican. At least Dr. Priest had fancied as much. He would admit this was partly due to the fact that he enjoyed any new thing that presented itself. It had been such a long time since he had a reason for his rising. The schedule of the men's labor saved him from the confusion his days had become since his practice was closed. A confusion that was worse now, not better, as all had said it would be. Worse with every year, in fact. This annoyed him greatly. He would not admit it, but he longed for things to break, pipes to freeze in the winter, roof tin to blow from the barns so that he could call for repairmen to come and then follow the workers as they plied their crafts. So when Juan Julio arrived with his crew, unbidden, it was a great and welcome surprise. The poles about the fence rows were draped with 3 lines, and as the men cleared them with patience and care, Dr. Priest heard of the younger man's endeavors. I bought my first truck with 5 years' earnings, Juan Julio had said. My second I bought with the earnings of 3. I brought up more men from my village, along with my brother, who watched the second crew, just as I do these. It seemed that Juan Julio would address his men only when it was time to move the truck, when it was time to take a break, and Priest had asked him why they needed such a scarcity of instruction. It was because he had trained them all himself, and he knew so well how to train them because this was how he had started. For years, I cut, he said. I cleared. I drove the machine. Priest rattled the ice in his glass. It used to be that way for himself. He cleared, he cut, he cleaned. Now, when stillness is all that is asked of him, he recollects nothing but motion, as though in all the years before he had been hooked to a line, one that had rushed him through the torrent of borderless, numberless days. He moved through their recollections like a man through a museum, and they rised from shadows, his fingers itching at their sight. There was the child he had seen on a table as though sleeping, except that the flesh of his trunk was peeled back, his organs shy and small, still as a stopped clock. And a rodeo rider, calm as pond water, sitting on a gurney, though a bull had hooked a horn into his mouth and out through the orbit of his right eye. There was Dr. Priest's son, a child curled and sleeping in the wheel wells as Priest drove through the night to make calls in the days when you went to houses, in the days when they came to yours. There were people full of water, so bloated he'd been forced to use a bucket to bail it all out. And a man's face split open by an oak plank shot backward from a planing table, his frantic eyes staring out on either side of a cracked skull, demolished nose. Priest had run a wire through his cheeks to stabilize his face. Stab wounds on Saturday nights, lungs near collapse. And the poor had borne gifts, turnips, collards, pole greens. They had known his father. They had known his grandfather. He took the sacks and gave them to the orderlies and marked the bills paid. And there were phone calls he would make after rest and tests had been run. Good news he could bring, that it was nothing, that it was all right, that there was time after all, years and years of a life left. He stared at his tea glass, trying to remember why he had become confused. The line of the sun was nearly level with his face. He took a detached interest in its progress as its heat climbed up his legs, his hips, his chest, like anesthesia as the table is tipped. You won't remember this, he would say to the man who lay there. I'll call your name when it's over. He shut his eyes. The story of the hurricane had troubled Juan Julio. He knows that. He sees that now. The man had wanted to tell it, and he had probably told it often if others would listen. It was not so much that he wanted to be comforted as to understand why he had been confused, why he had climbed down and let some other take his place. And at that moment, Juan Julio lost his peace, like a coin dropped from his pocket. Now he wanted to make good. But he was caught in a storm, Juan Julio. Priest knew that. He was caught and he could not see his way clear. It worried him, which is why his clothes were so clean, his hair brushed so well. Yes, he was always earnest, but he was more so now. He was meticulous to a fault now. He would let nothing spill. He would not let a scrap of trash fall. His men must follow every rule, and his rigor with time was that of a saint. He was prepared, alert, forever telling himself where he was, what he was doing, what he was yet to do, so that he would not again be caught out, so that he would not again be found dreaming. But he had time to atone. The more and longer he lived, the more he could tell the tale again and again until his labors drove it from his mind. And that was what Dr. Priest would say when he returned. That was the peace he would tell him, that he had time. He had set this bone for a bone that could not be set, cut out this mass for the one too large to cut, apply this pressure for that which could not be damned, raise the near dead for the dead that could not be raised. For Priest has seen its face, what every man fears. He has been the one to whom they held when they realized at last that love alone could not save them. Not their wives or husbands or children, but him, only him, when blood and history and friendship held no power against a rampant disease, a failing heart, time. And he would rise at such a thing, his muscles stiff and tight. He would rise at what they believed of him and talk to them like an angel with a sword in his mouth. But now the days are full of skies that will not rain. They beg a purpose they are not given. Now he rises at night, ready, prepared, if only they would let him. He looks for a task, for a thing to make right, if they would let him. He hunts the corners of the house, the places of recess, as if they hold a discovery, a mute cry, fraught eyes. He could be ready. He would need little. He had restored a man's wind with a penknife. He had tied off a vein with baling twine. Priest stopped the swing, stared into the pasture, at the clearing and the trees. They must be let through, he had decided. The power lines. They must be let through to carry answers, voices, questions put. Though they damaged and distorted the living, broke between the green, pulsing world with their naked purpose, their way must be cleared. They ran between things, and they must be prepared, stand, and wait for their time. They must be ready, as he was, always. even now, to say to those who called, who held up the bright red water of their need, be still. Bring me the light. Hold it here. This is the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, H.E. Harmon. I think, I have your book on Kindle version, Some Bore Gifts, and I'm amazed at how gripping some of your stories are, and also how there are some that are very playful psychologically in the characters that you develop. So thank you for that wonderful reading.
Thank you.
Okay, what I want to do now, but I still don't see a way, I can ask all to unmute so that we can kind of have some real applause for all of our readers today. So I'm hitting the ask all to unmute. So I don't find the ability to do it on my end. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Great meeting. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Absolutely wonderful. Terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific. All three. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful work.
Yes.
Now that we are all unmuted, let's have a Q&A period, and just address your question to one of our readers or to all of them.
Excuse me. I'd like to ask Mr. Harmon, what part of the South do you come from?
Well, I was raised in Mississippi, and when I was about 10, 11, we moved right across the border into southern Middle Tennessee, and we had horse farms in both places. And so I grew up in both places. My grandparents were, of course, all down in Mississippi. So, and I went to school down there too. So I guess if you had to say, I guess Mississippi is what I claim, and Tennessee as well.
Really? I was born in Tennessee, but I don't claim that either. That was wonderful use of a dialect that I just adore. That was great.
Thank you.
I was holding my breath near the end there. I was making my breath hold.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I loved your work. It's really wonderful.
Wonderful images. I love the cage was not a home. Cage is not homes, I think.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful line. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
that was it was a funny thing. As I said, that actually my father, who was a retired surgeon, we raised horses and cattle, and he had, when he did practice, he stopped practicing. He was really lost, and because he loved healing. He loved what he did, and I think that's something I don't think he knew himself well enough to know that he should not have stopped. And he looked for things and looked for things to do. And when people would come to the farm like this man, he would latch on to them, and they formed a fellowship, these two people from different parts of the world. And this great tragic event had happened to this man on the Gulf Coast, and Daddy had seen so much tragedy and so much beauty in life too, and was able to bring that. And I think they had a wonderful epiphany with each other that summer. And I was privy enough to hear him tell me this, and I did my best to honor it. I hope I did.
Great.
You did.
Great. You did.
You did.
Perfect.
You did. Very good. And John, I'd like to hear some more of that song, you know what I mean? Your growly little song. You spent time on the Isle of Skye, did you say?
Sorry?
The Isle of Skye?
Yes, the pronunciation is Kalmustianavik. Kalmus means a bay in Gaelic, and it's the bay below Tianavik, which is a mountain there. Yeah, it's the village where my father grew up, and I spent a lot of time there. The song, you mean A Man's a Man?
When you were growling there.
Robert Burns?
The Burns one. Yeah, well, okay, I can do a little bit. Is there for honest poverty that hangs his head and that the coward slave, we pass him by, we dare be poor for that, that and that, our toils obscure and that, the rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gold for all that. And it goes on with that.
John, I'm really jealous of your ability to memorize such, fairly long, complex poems. How does that happen? And I'm also interested in your Celtic Chaos group, and wonder if I can get some of that on Apple Music.
Joyce, do you want to answer? Or I don't know if Joyce is still here. Joyce is sort of the front of the band. No, my wife has this band, and we thought it'd be good to have poetry in it. I started off with funny stuff, and it went over well. And now when we haven't been doing concerts for a while because of COVID, but when we were doing concerts, I would do 15, 20 minutes of poetry, a mixture of funny stuff and not so funny stuff. But people seem to like the variety of it, and I had a lot of fun reciting poetry in front of people, making them laugh some of the time. So yeah, that was excellent. In terms of memorizing it, I've written and memorized most of my poetry running on the beach here. I just love to do long distance running, and I just run along the shore, and I'd carry a voice recorder and record ideas and come back and write them up. But the memorization is just brute labor. You take a poem out, you run along, you get enough of it in your head that you can sort of get it back limpingly, and then you do that 30 or 40 times. But it is actually interesting because you get it wired into your head, but you've got a certain familiarity of environment. And I stumbled a couple of times here because it's Zoom, and it's quite different from, normally I wouldn't do that if I was in front of a live audience.
Never stumble.
You can do that when you sleep, Yeah. You can turn it on a recorder and go to sleep, and when you wake up, everything.
Yeah.
That's a little easier.
The main thing is to have a safety net if you stumble, like, don't panic, leave that to me.
John, this is Jim Moonen, and I just wanted to say I enjoyed all of your poems tonight, and I don't think there's ever been a poem that I haven't been impressed by of yours. But I wanted to draw attention to the group here to, if they haven't seen it yet, your address to the haggis on Erratosphere. It is just absolutely nails it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful visual, as well as, John, it shows off your great speaking voice. So people should go to Erratosphere and search for it. It's fantastic.
Isn't haggis something to eat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had it in Scotland, so I thought it was, I spent some time in the Hebrides, so.
Well, it's a Robert Burns poem, I think.
Oh yeah.
Haggis.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. You should really take a look.
Thanks, Jim. No, the haggis, they say, uses the parts of the animal that the other recipes won't use.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So the organs and things.
I have more of a
Emily, you're just dreamy. Emily, you're just absolutely dreamy. Your poems were just dreamy. They just took me right away.
Yes.
I was dreaming half the time you were speaking, because they have a certain charm and chime to them that no one else can do.
And I love the pauses too. I mean, in your reading too. Very effectual, I thought. And the language was beautiful. I have a generalization of it. I need to go into specifics, but beautiful for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Your
So
book,
when John was just talking, I was thinking of last year in the fall, we were in Rome and I was doing philosophical stuff, but Mirko Di Stefani had a concert in Venice. So we went up to Venice. And I just was thinking about how wonderful it is to hear. And there was a wonderful musician and a wonderful pianist and a wonderful soprano singing those songs, which you can get them on, you can actually just listen to them on YouTube. And in Venice, you know, it was one of the most wonderful days of my life.
Emily, I'm impressed by, your book is new and selected poems. And so there are a lot of poems there, and I'm impressed by the variety of your subject matter and also by what a naturalist you are when it comes to the floral world. Beautiful, beautiful descriptions, very detailed. Love it.
I know a lot about trees. Right now I'm writing a book about philosophy of biology, and there's a big emphasis on trees. I mean, you know how important forests are right now, you know, with the global warming thing, and how many forests we've cut down. Actually, one of my best friends from high school taught me a lot of trees, you know, so I could like identify them. And so there's lots and lots of trees and different kinds of trees in those poems.
Emily, could you give us one, am I unmuted? I think so.
Yes.
Could you give us a reference to one of the composers where we can hear your poems as songs?
Yeah, hold on one second. Okay, I think I've got them right here.
AG, are you reading?
Yeah, so
I'm trying to find more about haggis here.
Here's the Mirko Di Stefani. I don't know, it's probably backwards. Mirko Di Stefani, and it's called Childhood Songs.
Great, yeah.
And you can actually listen to it on, and then there's Songs of Two Bellevilles. I don't know, can you see it?
Got it, yes, thank you.
By Bruce Trinkley. And then there is this lovely one called First Piano Lesson by Coco Stanikova.
Oh, great.
And, you know, I've been to concerts by all three of them in Italy and in Japan and here. And it's so wonderful.
That's the piano lesson poem you read when the two young ones first put the piano together.
Yeah.
It's that poem. Great.
Yes, it's named after that poem.
Great.
Yeah, Emily, that poem reminded me of my favorite semester in undergrad, where I was working on my senior thesis on Leibniz, his mereology, which, you know, Emily knows me, that's not a surprise. I was taking Calculus 2 and I was taking music theory. And I had deliberately lined those three things up because I was looking forward to the synchronicity of them. And I'm really intrigued when you talk about the relationship between mathematics and poetry now, because I hadn't sucked that one into, you know, that little constellation.
So that book is called Great Circles.
Great, okay.
Okay, that's
Cool.
that's where I discuss that.
Nice.
Any other questions for our readers?
Just to comment, I posted in the chat a link to John reading the address to the haggis. It also contains some nice links to some of his poems at Poem Hunter.
Good.
John, you
And-
should update the links though. Many of those are dead links in the notes.
Thank you.
And of course, all three of the readers have their books posted in the chat room, the links to Word Galaxy Press.
Can I ask a question?
Yes?
So, John, when you go from where you are now back over to Scotland, you just fly, and how far is it? It's not that far, right?
Oh no, it's quite far.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, because we're on the west coast of Canada. You got to go right across.
Oh, you're on the
Canada.
west coast. I thought you
Yeah,
were.
right across Canada and right across the Atlantic.
Oh,
Yeah, we fly. We don't row or cycle.
Oh, I thought you were on the east coast.
No, Vancouver Island's off the west coast, on the west of Vancouver.
Yeah.
Thanks. By the way, I loved your poetry too, and the references to astronomy, which were beautifully done, and AG as well. That was a gripping story and some great language in it, like an angel with a sword in his mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote that line down. It was a angel with a sword in its mouth.
And you too,
What a
Emily.
wonderful line.
What was the one there? Double star burning like fox eyes from the den of space.
Okay, well, I think maybe we can call it a wrap at this point. Alex wanted to make some closing remarks, but I don't see him up on the.
Well, I'm still here, but what I want to tell everyone is that we have another reading coming up on the 27th, where we'll have Kerry Green, and we'll have Sally Thomas, and also we'll have let's see, where else do we have? My memory is failing me. Haley and Katie, who will be hosting. So say hi to Katie. She will be our host for that event.
Hi everyone, looking forward to it.
Hi, Katie.
Hi. Thanks so much. My toddlers needed me, so I was late to this reading, and I'm sorry I didn't get to hear most of it, but it'll be Dad's bedtime for the next reading, so.
And I also have links to that reading in the chat if you look at the links I posted. So you can go there and sign up for that event on the 27th. And so I hope to see some of you there also. And thank you all for showing up tonight. It was a great reading from John, from Emily, and AG. Thank you all.
Thank
Let's have
you.
another round of
Thank
applause.
you. Thank you, Alex.
Alex.
And David.
Thanks again.
Thank
Thank you, David, for hosting.
Emily. Hello, Emily. Where's Emily? There she is. You moved. Once again, her book, Great Circles, has sent me in an excellent direction. So I cannot say enough thanks to you. I'll email you.
Oh, great. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.